action. Okay, so now I'm recording. So what we're going to do today is go through a continuation of what we did before. So let me remind you what we did before. So here was the page that we had kind of come up with, which lists out the different systems that we have in our database. Okay, and remember we went through the process of not only creating this list, but then also adding each one a link. And if we click any single one of these right now, what we get is this, which is an output of the array of data that we've got from the database for a particular system. Okay. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you just quickly how to create the view file for this, because if you remember, when we have these functions, right, each one of these is an action as part of the URL. And so we had done the index page, but right here we've got the function for the view, and we've got the need to send the identifier, the ID, the numeric value for which row in that table that we want. And that's what we were able to do in the view file by, right, we created the URL system/view/ and then we added the ID of the row on the end of that URL string right there. That's how it makes it the link. So what we need to do is to make a page is get rid of this debug statement. But the first thing I'm going to do is show you that, and you don't absolutely have to do this when you do this, but one of the hard parts about doing this stuff is when something goes wrong, how do I work out where the problem is? So what I've done is I've already added a second variable to this, and I'll show you how this works. And it's a debug called debug. So this is, again, it's a variable because it's got the dollar symbol at the front. And I'm going to say debug equals false. So this is being set to a Boolean false. Okay, so that means I can test it in an if statement. Okay, so if debug, so what this is doing is just going to say, it's going to test and see if it's true or if it's false. If it's true, it will do what's inside the curly braces. If it's false, it will ignore that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the debug statement. And so right now, if let me show you here, and you'll be able to, I'm going to try and show you a few errors and explain them so that you at least get a sense of what you might see. So right now, this code will execute. It'll do the first line and find the system data, the data for a system, and put it in the system variable. And then if debug is set to false, which it is by default there, it will ignore this statement and then go on. But we haven't yet created the view file, okay, to be able to view data. And we also haven't, like we did up here, we haven't set a variable to be sent to the view. So at this point, it's going to give me an error because we haven't done what we need to do to actually send the data to the view. So let me just show you that real quick. So if I refresh this, it's now going to say, oh, you have a missing view page that you haven't created in the systems folder. Under the view folder, you haven't created view.ctp. Okay, so that's the file we need. And so that's what I'm going to create right now. So we go back. If I show where all the files are, remember this is the view folder. It contains folders within it, and each folder within it is basically for a particular controller file. So remember, we created the systems controller, so we created the systems folder in here, and we have our index.ctp file, which allows us to display the index page that we've already seen, but we need the equivalent view.ctp file. So this is a right mouse click, go up to new, create file, view.ctp. Okay, now I'm going to be referring to some some sheets I have here that I've already done so that I can hopefully do this in a relatively expeditious fashion, but not go so fast as to not let you really see what's going on. Okay, so this is my view file, and I still have to set up and send the data to the view, but I'm going to anticipate what I get, and I'm going to say, okay, let me create a header. Let me go at page 2, and inside that I'm going to echo out. Let me finish off this. There we go. So I'm going to echo out system name. So the name of the system. Okay. So in order to be able to get the system variable in the view, remember I have to go back in to here, and just like I did up here, I'll actually copy and paste it. I have to set, in this case, the system variable to, in this case, the system variable in the function. Now, the first time you see this, I'm sure you're like, well, why, you've already created a variable called system. Why isn't that enough just to be able to send the data to the view? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know why that's not enough. But I do know that in order to be able to actually send that to the view, you have to do this set statement at the bottom. Okay, now having done that, this should mean we now get something on a page here. But I have an error. So you can see this says undefined index name on line 1 of view.ctp. Okay, so we know that we need to look in view.ctp, which is right here. And so what this is saying is that I do not have the right syntax. I'm not, whatever I'm accessing there, it's either not available or it's not coded correctly. Okay, so let me look at what I did wrong there. Oh, yeah. So this is actually a good example. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to try and debug what that problem was by, okay, I'm going to use this piece of the code that we created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the URL, which is currently, I know it's very difficult for you to see it right now, but it's systems/view/001, which is the first system. And because I've now added that second variable in that function called debug, if I do another slash and I add the word true, now I'm going to set that variable debug to true. And when it does that, the if statement says, oh, it's true. I'm going to be able to spit out what's inside the if statement. And so now it will spit out what the contents of the debug variable is in there. And we see the same thing that we saw before. Okay, so what the problem is I didn't remember the structure of the array for the system variable. What I thought was that name was right here, was right underneath the definition of the array, but actually system is first. So what I'm going to do with that, I can do it one of two ways, but I'm actually going to do it this way. I'm going to say, I don't really want to have to deal with this piece of this array. So rather than sending the whole array, I'm just going to send this piece of the array, which is the sub piece. So this is an array variable, and this is one piece of an array indicated by this index. Okay, and so when I do that, and I go off from debug, so I'm going to take the true off the end of the URL. Now that if function won't work anymore, and it won't spit out what's in that variable, but it will go to the view page. And if I now go to the view page, now it's actually spitting out caffeine in water, which is the value of the name. Okay. All right. Well, that's okay, but we had more information in that variable, so we could also spit out H3. And again, I can just copy and paste, and obviously this is a good way to help you more efficiently code a little bit. You can copy what you already have done. I also have a part of that array called type, so I'm going to spit that out too. And now I have both the title or the name of the system, and I also have what type it is. It's a solution. But of course, that's pretty boring. But that's all the data that we have from accessing the systems table, sorry. Right? If I go and look into the systems table, right? This is all the data that I have. I have the ID of each row, I have a name field, and I have a type field. I don't have any more data about the system in this particular table, okay? So I have to do something about that if I want to make that page more engaging. I want to do something else with that page. So what I want to do is I really would like to get to the point where I can actually show what the chemicals or the compounds are that are in that solution. Okay, I know in the title it says it's caffeine and water, but what I would really like to do is be able to maybe even show a picture of those molecules. So the question is, well, how do I do that? Well, the data is in the database, but it's somewhere else, right? The data about what compounds are there is in the compounds database, but really and truthfully, if I want to go and find out what the system is made of, first of all, I have to go to components, and then I have to go to chemicals, and then I have to go to compound. Now, that's pretty complicated, right? I mean, I'm starting in one database table with information about the system, but in order to be able to add in this other data, I need to go other places to do that. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, one side comment here, I had set up originally this database table to be components, which is what we had defined in the Excel spreadsheet, okay? I've had to change it, and the reason I've had to change the name of it is because internally to CakePHP, it uses the components controller for something else. So I had to change it, and I added chem components. It makes it a little longer, but it means it'll actually work. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to do what I want to do, okay? All right, so how do I do this? Well, if I go back in here and I go to the system controller, I'm going to close this down so on the left-hand side here, you can collapse down other functions to make things a little cleaner. In addition, right, you can click here and that will take the sidebar away, and then you can open it back up again. And remember, the little icon over here will tell you if it's red, there's where any errors are, and you should see a red bar on this side, which is kind of in alignment with which line is the problem, okay? So just know that. So, okay, we've got data about the system, and if I go and debug again, so I'm going to go back to /true. The data that I have so far is this, and what this gets me is the system ID value. Well, the system ID value is actually also in another place. It's also in, if I go to components, right, it's also in the components table. So I can use that system ID that I've already retrieved. I mean, I had it in the URL, and I can go and get data from this table. Because I have the system ID, I can go and say, find me the data in this table that has system ID equal to the value that I currently have, okay? So the way we do that is as follows. The other thing I've added in this file is this variable that's called uses. And uses here is something that is all about which tables you want to use or that you want to access. If you only want to access, in this case, the systems table in the database, you don't even need that variable. It automatically knows that you want to pull data out of that table because this file is called systems controller. It translates that into the table in the database that's called systems is what you want to pull data out of. But if I want to pull data out of systems, but I also want to pull data out of data points, I have to tell it that. And so that's why I have to use the uses variable. And so I'm going to put data point singular in here just like I've got system singular in here. So what this tells the code, okay, make available the functionality that is like this code right here, make that available in this file. So not only can I get data from the systems table, I can get data from the data points table. And I can actually do this for as many tables as I like, as long as I include the name of them in that variable, okay? We're going to put a number of those in there, but for now, we're just going to worry about the system. So let's go get the component data. So now that I have set it up in uses, I can create a variable I'm going to call components. I'm sorry, I mixed muddled that. I need chem component here, not data point yet. Component. There we go. All right. So I'm going to create a variable called components, and I'm going to say, okay, go access the chem component table. I want to find all. Notice in system I found first. If I've got an ID for a system, there's only one of that system in that table, so I only need to find the first one. But in here, I don't know how many components there are in this system, so I need to get them all. And I'm going to do that by searching. And again, in the database table, I have this field called system ID. So what I want is to say, okay, the conditions of my search are going to be where system, and I need to make this easy for you to see, system ID equal, in this case, we would go, I'm going to do a not a cheat, but I'm going to do something in code that I like to do because it makes things easier. I'm going to set, well, I don't even need to do this. I have the ID for the system. It's in this ID variable right here because this is the system's controller. So I'm going to put ID right there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste what was in the debug there. And now I'm going to just put in components there. And I'm actually going to delete the exit from here. In fact, because I want to do this multiple times, I'm going to copy this and put just the exit at the bottom so that anytime I use this debug in an if statement, it's going to spit out whatever variable is right there. So it's going to show me the data as I go through running this script. Okay. So if I go back, now when I do this, hopefully, not only do I get obviously the system data, but now I've searched the chem component table and I have the 2 rows of data that corresponds to data for system ID equal to 1. Notice system ID equal 1 there. Okay. So now I have information about the components, but this still doesn't help me much. Because it does get me the role. I've got access to what the role is of each of these components, but it doesn't get me to the actual data about the chemical. So I have to do this one more time. And in order to do this, I have to do another for loop. So I'm going to loop through these individual components here, and I'm going to pull out the chemical ID value, which I'm then going to use to search the chemical table. Okay, so because I need to search the chemical table, I need to add that to my list at the top. I was looking at the wrong, there we go. Okay, yeah, all right. So in here, what I want to do is I'm actually going to set up a variable first called chemicals. So I'm going to actually, and I'm going to make it this is called an empty variable, but it's kind of like you have to set it up before you put data in there. It's good programming practice. But I've made it an empty array so that I can store things in there that I need. So in this case, I need to, so ID, chem components. Yeah, that's all right. Okay. All right. All right. So what I'm going to do is, again, just to make things a little bit easier for me in the code, is I'm going to get rid of this piece called chem component here. I'm going to I just want to deal with the data that's in here. I don't want to have to worry about having to rewrite that every single time I want to access the data that I'm going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to say, I'm going to do chem ID equals component. Notice the autocomplete that it does. And then I'm going to actually just pull out, oh, that's right, I haven't, this is not the shorthand that I was thinking about, that's further on. So, all right, so I'm going to pull out the chemical ID of each component into this variable called ChemID. So I'm pulling this value out every time I go through the loop. I'm pulling this value out so I can use it to search something else, which in this case, right, is the chemical table data. So if I want to get data about a particular chemical, I'm going to set up this variable called chemical. Now my naming here of these variables is really completely up to me. So in a sense, you really typically will try and make it something that means something to you in the context of what's being done here. Okay, you could make these though anything you want. It just makes it more difficult to understand the flow of what's going on and also to debug this later on. Okay, all right, so we're searching for this chemical, find, again in this case, we're only looking for one particular chemical because we have a particular ID for that chemical. So we're going to set the conditions equal to the ID in the chemical table is equal to the value of the chem ID that I pulled out from the data from the chem component table. Now I know that this looks a little bit intimidating, okay, but the idea here is that, think about this piece as asking the database for information, okay? And then once you've asked for that information, you have to put it into something here to store it so you can then do something with it, okay? All right, now what I'm going to do is, because I'm looping through all the components and I want to capture all this data from all these different components, if I looped right now, it's going to overwrite chemical the next time I go through this loop. Okay, so the reason why I generated the chemicals array up here is that's a place I'm going to save the information that I'm pulling. So let me go and do that. So chemicals. I want to put a new piece of data in chemicals, so I use square brackets. And I'm just going to dump in what the contents is of the variable called chemical. So I'm basically using the chemical ID from the components table to search in the chemical data table for information about the chemicals so that I can store it in the array called chemicals. And if so actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. Okay, so I'm going to edit this up and I'm going to get the chemicals here. So I'm trying to document what I'm doing as I go along. So now if I put the chemicals array in here, when I do debug, I will see what the system data was, which we've seen before, what the components array contained in terms of data, and now also what the chemicals array that I've just created contains in terms of data. And so here's now what's in the chemical array variable. It's the data from the chemical table, which contains the purity qualifier, the purity value, and the unit, and the supplier information. Okay, so I've sequentially, because these tables are linked together by their IDs, I've started at system, I've gone down into components or chem components, I've then gone to chemical, and finally I'm going to go to compound, which is where the table that contains the compound information. Okay, so one final step here. So now I want to get the compound. Compounds, not good to misspell. Okay, so I have all the data about the chemicals in here, and in the chemicals data, I have the compound IDs. Okay, so I'm going to pull out from there the compound IDs, which is going to get me the compound data. So let's see. So we're going to set up another variable, this time called compounds. So I try and be very logical about how I name things and set up things. I'm actually going to move this further down so that it's kind of right where I need it. And in this particular situation, I'm going to do basically the same thing I did with the previous one. This time, though, it's now with chemicals as chemical. Just so you know, the autocomplete that happened here, where it gave me the option to just autocomplete to the word chemical, it did automatically based on the fact that it saw a plural right here. Okay, so it's not pre-coded like that. It's not like I told it if I have a variable called chemicals that's plural, I want to have singular chemical as the next variable. It's automatically doing that for me. Okay, so I'm going to create equivalently to the chem ID here. I'm going to create the compound ID, which is oh, get rid of that. This is chemical. Let's see. Compound ID. Now this looks a little bit different to up here, and the reason is that the structure is a little bit different. Actually, it's not. What am I doing? Oh, that's okay. Doing this live is not as easy as I thought. Anyway, so we're going to set that up and we'll see if this works. This may not work, but that's okay. We can debug it because that's an important thing for you to see. Compound equals this. So now we need to go up and add compound because we're going to get data from the compound table in addition to the chemical and the component table. It would give me obviously an error if I didn't have that up there. It wouldn't know what to do with this command. I'm going to find, I did that already, the first where conditions are that the ID equals the comp ID. Okay. And then I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to throw that data in the compounds variable that I created. I think I missed something up above. That's part of the reason, but that's all right. Yeah. So, so right now there's a problem, and if I were to run this, there would be an error. In fact, let's do that so you can see it. Um, okay. Oh, there it is. So it's saying, oh, I can't find this particular part of the array called compound ID. It just doesn't exist. Okay. The problem is, right now I am sending this piece of the code. When I go through the loop, I'm sending this whole piece to to the variable called comp ID, and as a consequence, comp ID is not right. It's not. This actually isn't correctly accessing the data in the array because it should be this. Right? Just equivalent to how I had the chem component up here. I need to go down the right number of levels, the right number of steps to be able to get access to the value in the array. In the code that I have here, I had added this piece in up here so that the chemicals array only had the data that was inside the chemical array. But in this case, this will still work because we basically got the same format for both of these. So in this case, though, down here, I'm putting into compounds just the data rather than this extra layer of compound. And if I go in and show you this, this will hopefully make a little bit better sense. So I'm going to spit out, also on my debug, I'm going to spit out the compounds array. So I have the data from the system table, the data from the chem component table, the data from the chemical table, and finally the data from the compound table, which actually has the compound metadata. Whew. There are better, easier ways to do this, but from a coding perspective to teach you guys, this is the easier way. Okay, there are structured ways and I'm going to show you one example of this in a little bit. Okay, so what can we do right now? Well, what we can do is we can send this data that we've got here in compound to the view. So notice I'm just naming this variable right here. I'm naming it the same as the name of the variable that I'm putting the data from. That just makes it easy to obviously follow the link, or easier. And in the view, so I'm going to try and organize this. So I've got the system set here, but I'm going to just set it all at the bottom. So this is a place where I send the data to the view file. Okay. So now I have both system and compounds, but the problem is, well, let me show you and spit it out on the page. I can go in here and in PHP on the view, I can do the following. PR is a shorthand function that I can do to print out the contents of a variable in the view, and I want to do compounds. So now I'm going to go off of debug mode, and you can see now I've sent not only the data about the system, its component data about the fact that it's a solution, but now I've given the data about the two different chemicals or two different compounds that are in this particular solution. Okay. But if I want to do more with this, well, I can do more with this. So what am I going to do? Well, maybe I want to identify that the solution has both a solvent and it has a solute. That data is contained components variable, right? This one that we created here. So I can also send that to the view. And if I do the same thing as I did with compounds, I can see that. All right, so I have the content of the component data in this array, and I have the data about the actual individual chemical compound in here. The problem is I don't have a direct way to go from chemical ID to go down to get the compound ID. So in terms of me being able to actually put stuff on this page, if I want to put in a particular place, so I want to identify or link the data between what type of thing this is, whether it's solid or solution, with which compound it is, I still have to send more information to the page. And that is why I actually have to also send the chemicals information as well. So let me do that too. I'm going to actually try and organize these a bit. All right. So I'm going to add in here chemicals. At this point, just so we can see the data we now have available in the view. And so now we have the component data, we have the chemical data, and we have the data about the individual compounds. And so what my goal now is to try and at least put out on the page, in this solution, the solute is caffeine and the water solvent is water. Okay, but the key thing is, well, how do I do this? Well, I have to pull the data from here, and I have to somehow link it to the data that's down here in this array. And so even though I've been able to grab all the data out of the database, I still have some work to do to be able to bring that data together and actually put it on the page in a way that makes it maybe good for a human to actually see. Okay. Now, what I'm going to show you is going to be done in the view, but really and truthfully, this kind of data manipulation or organization should be done in the controller file, and then all the view gets is the data that it needs to make the page. That's really how this is supposed to work, but I'm going to do it obviously slightly differently than that. So let me show you how that works. All right, so I'm going to iterate over the components. So I'm kind of doing a similar thing that I did on the controller. I'm going to go through things to pull out the data that I need. First of all, what I want to do, and this is what I was talking about, I'm doing a shorthand. I'm going to create, this is just an intermediate variable, just so that I don't have to retype a very long string for the chem component part of the component variable. So some component chem component. All right, so now I've just got the data for this component and I want to do something with it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show the role of the component. And to do that, I'm going to echo. Now, you can actually mix, like I said before, you can mix PHP code with HTML code. But in this case, I'm just going to do it all in PHP. And there's no problem with doing that. It just sometimes it's better to do it mixing it. But in this case, I think it's a little bit less confusing. Okay, so I'm going to spit out from my component what the role is of this particular component. And actually, I'm going to do it this way for now. I'm going to modify it slightly in a minute. So I've got H3, and if I were to just leave it like that, if I go back to the view here, what I would get is, oh look, we have the words solute and solvent there. Oh, that's great, but still doesn't really help you communicate which is the solvent and which is the solute. So if I go back here, now what I want to do is I want to go grab more data. So I want to find the chemical that is linked to the component. Okay, and so I do that by, again, going through a for loop over the, in this case, the chemicals array that I have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the chemical ID of this particular chemical is equal to the component chemical ID variable. Now I want to explain this a second. So in a situation like this, where you have a variable and it equals something with a single equals symbol, what you're doing is you're saying, I want to set the value of this variable to be whatever the value of this piece of data is. Okay, so you're basically storing whatever's in here in this variable. When you're in a situation with an if statement, it's really evaluating, is the value in this variable equal to the value that's in this variable? Okay, so we use double equals there. So it's not trying to, this statement is not trying to take this value and set and make this value equal to this. It's testing whether they are equal or not. Okay, and the result of that is either a true or a false. It's either equal or it's not equal. Okay, if it is equal, then it will do something in here. If it's not equal, you'll finish the loop and you'll go to the next chemical, okay, in this array. And because of the fact the way this is set up, it will find one that is equal, but we don't know where it is. So in the situation where it does match, then we're going to set up a variable called compound ID, which is chemical compound ID. So we've pulled out of the chemical array, okay, we're pulling out, so let me explain further. So we went into chem component, we pulled out the chemical ID, which is this value. We then said, okay, let me go and find in this array where that value is equal to the ID value here. And when it is, let's go and grab what this compound ID is right here, because that tells us which one of the compounds in this table that this particular component is. Okay. Now I know that's some logic that might be a little tough to follow, but you've got these relationships between the data, between the tables. This is a way to go grab what you need to be able to go get the data that is in another variable. Okay, so what we're also going to do here is, let me get to the right place. Actually, that's not right. I need here. All right. So in this situation, let's say it comes through and it finds a match for the first chemical in this array. Well, there's really no reason for it to go and look any further on. right? It's already found a match. It doesn't need to go do more stuff because nothing else is going to match it. So there's a way you can tell the code to not do anything further, and that is break. What the break does is it says, as soon as you find out this situation is true, you go grab the data you need, and then you get out of this loop so you don't keep iterating more cycles that you don't need to do. Now, again, in this situation, the arrays we have are not big. They've only got two different pieces in each one. But I've built websites where this is several thousand in an array. Okay, so if you try and iterate over all of that without the need to do so, you slow things down quite considerably. So there's a reason to do this. It makes for an efficient, hopefully, code. All right. Any questions at this point that you guys are willing to ask? Okay, everybody's in stunned silence. All right. So now we're going to find the chemical that is linked to the, I'm sorry, we're going to find the compound that is linked to the chemical. Okay, and we're basically going to do the same thing that we just did up here. So I'm actually going to just copy this and paste it, but I need to change the variables here. So this is going to be compounds and singular compound. And so I want compound ID here. And this is compound ID, right, that I got. So this is operating, so this code is going down. It creates this variable, which has just got the information we need. It uses it to put something on the page. We go through here, we grab the compound ID that we need for this particular component, and then we go and we actually find the compound information from the compounds variable. And at this point, let's see. We still need to update this because this was from the previous loop. So now, in the situation where this is true, now we've found the actual part of the variable, the compound variable, that has the data we need. So we found the compound because we've made sure that the compound ID value is the same as the compound value ID value we had from the chemicals table, and now we can echo out what the compound name is, which is kind of what we wanted to do, at least nominally. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to change things up. I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to paste it down here so that it's going to print out this piece. It's also going to print out a colon and a space, and then it's going to execute this code. And finally, when it gets here, it's going to add the name of the compound to the end of the roll here, and then finish the tag H3. And if I do that, hopefully, we have errors. Oh dear. What went wrong? Okay. We have an undefined index ID, this is the first one, on line 14 of the view.ctp file. So we go to view.ctp and we look at 14. And we say, oh, okay, so chemical ID, that's interesting. Component. All right, so even though this is supposed to be working based on what I have in my code, it's not. So what's gone wrong? Well, if I look at the chemical, this is really big. Let me tone this down a bit. We have the chemical array. Well, I think the easiest thing here is to do the following. What I really want to do is I want to find out, maybe I want to find out what the chemical variable here is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to see, because obviously what I'm expecting to be here is not. So I'm going to, I think I know what the issue is. I'm going to look at what is in this array called chemical right now and see if it's different than what I expect it to be. And so the first iteration, it will show me that, hopefully. Okay, and it does show me that, and it says, I forgot to take account of the fact again that there is this intermediate part of the array called chemical, and it's really annoying, but it is what it is. So how do I fix that? What I do is I have to say that that's the value I want to test. So I can get rid of this, and I can basically take it out of the code by putting it in as a comment. And so now this should do what I want, but we'll see. Oh, there is another error, and that's on line 17. And that's because I didn't do the same thing in the variable here. I need to put this in. So now this should work. And finally, I get to what I wanted. I've put the type solute, and I've put the name caffeine right by it. So I've gone through the process of data in different arrays, and I've gone and grabbed the data that I want and pulled it, so I've kind of organized it on the page. Again, not particularly great, so let's do something a bit more fun. So I'm going to close these up and add another piece here, which is show molecular structure. Now, how might I do that? Well, I don't know if you remember, but in the chemical identifier resolver website, there is a function where you can actually have it give you a GIF image, or a GIF image, whichever way you like to say it, of the molecular structure. And in particular, I like this format, which is, it's a URL based on the INCHI string. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the INCHI string here. I'm going to go back into my code. I'm going to initially put it in a variable. Okay, but what I really want to do is I want to take out this actual INCHI code, and I want to splice in. So I'm dynamically creating the link to be able to go grab the image file. I want to take the let's see, the compound data that I have for this particular compound, and let me make sure I get this right. Compound INCHI. Actually, that's not right. I want this. Okay, so that's the URL to that particular. Actually, this is not going to work, and the reason it's not going to work right now is because oh no, it is. Okay, so it is going to work, and the reason it's going to work is because the iteration of this where this breaks out, where it's equal, this variable compound is set, and it's the last, it's what the last time it was set as, so it's still got that data down here. So finally what we do is we echo out this. So this is the helper function. We can put an image in on the page, and we do it just like that. There's actually something else we can do, and in order to make them spaced nicely, what I'm also going to do is just add extra space, which is a break. So every time I iterate around each component, it's going to put on the page the role of that component. It's going to then put the name of the compound that is that component, and finally it's going to put the image of what that chemical looks like. And if I go back to the page, there we go. Okay, so I know this was a long path to see this, but the point is, you can go get lots of data from the database, you can manipulate it, then you can use it in the view to create the picture of what the information looks like on the page. But we still haven't really got anything useful here. We have, it's more useful, and we can make it better. But one of the things that's really missing here is I would like to see some data. I would like to see some actual data that we got from that article. So we can do that, and this is the final thing I'll do, by going back to the system controller, and now I'm going to add data point. And what that means is, down here, now I'm going to go grab the data points for this system. Okay, and so the way I do that is, let me get the right place. There we go. All right, now this is where I'm going to show you how you can actually grab data from multiple locations. And so the first thing we're going to have to do here is I'm going to have to create a new file, and it's called the data point model. And it needs to be basically built off of this. So what we're going to do is this. Oh, that's not right. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So we're going to create a model called data point. Now we could already have used it with the find command, but what we're going to do here is set up a couple of additional pieces that allow us to link data together dynamically using this code. So there's two pieces I need here. The first is I need it to say a variable, set a variable acts as, and I'm going to assign it to containable. Now what that means is that I'm going to be able to use the contain function of the find command that we've already been using. But I also need to say the following, and this is kind of the really useful stuff. I'm going to say that the data in this table belongs to data in other tables. In this case, the condition table, which I could spell right, and the data table, right? Because the data point table just contains data about linking the information in the conditions table to the information in the data table. Okay, now I've set this up. What I can do in the controller is the following. I'm going to set a very similar variable called contain here. And I want to do that so I can basically I want to pull both data from data point, but also condition and data. So I'm going to try and do this all in one command. And so the variable I set up is data points. I'm sorry, points in this case, making it a little easier. I want to find all the data points where the conditions are that the system ID, remember system ID is in the data points table. I want to say when that is equal to the system ID, which was what we had right at the top, the ID variable. But that's not all. Something else I want to throw in here is that I want to use contain, the contain function, and I'm sorry, this should be contain. And I'm going to set it to that. And then finally, I have to set a variable called recursive. And the reason to do that is because this is a powerful function that will basically allow you to go through and link multiple tables together. And theoretically, at least, you can pull huge amounts of data because you're pulling data from lots of different tables altogether. Okay, so what does this look like? Well, let's have a look. So I'm going to debug points. And so if I do my debug function again on this file, so setting it to true, now at the bottom, this is my points variable. And what you see is it's pulled data from the data points table, but it's also pulled the data that relates from the conditions table and the data table at the same time. So this functionality is what basically is doing exactly what we just did with evaluating, components to chemicals to compounds, but this does it all in one go. Okay, now it's maybe a little bit more difficult to understand, but at least it allows you to do this. I know we're running out of time here, so let me show you what you can do with that data. So at the end of here, I want to set, so we're going to set one more variable. We're going to pass the points. To the view. And then in the view, after that loop to go over the chemicals, I'm just going to go grab what I already have, at least I hope I already have, and paste it in there and explain it rather than type it all in. Yeah, that's not what I need. Systems, view. Yeah, I want to. Yeah, geez. All right. So I'm going to grab this code down here. And I'm going to paste it in. So what I'm doing is I'm creating an HTML table. I've got a header for the table. This is obviously the first part of defining the table. And then I've got temperature as a header and solubility as a header. And then I'm going to iterate over my points variable for each individual point. And I'm going to go grab the individual value for the temperature and the individual value for the solubility, and I'm going to spit it on the page. I'm missing the ending table tag here, so let me put that in. Okay, and so finally, I'm gonna take those away because I don't need them. I want to just see what I have left. Okay, it's not. Okay, why are you doing that to me? All right, so if I take true off, now I have my two solutes, my two components, and I have a data table at the bottom with the information about the solubility of that particular system. Okay. Now that's going to be it. I know it's a lot, but you just follow along what I just did in class on the video, and if you have problems, contact me. Okay. Let me stop the recording.